Hey, what's up everyone? I'm Edin, and today I'm going to explain to you the printing press. Seriously, I'm going to talk about the Federal Reserve and how they print money without really printing money, and how that supports what Congress does with regards to our stimulus checks. So before we check it out, make sure you hit the subscribe button, like the video, share it with your friends, and keep coming back for more.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another stimulus update. I'm Logan.
And I'm Edin.
And Edin, on Sunday, Jerome Powell, aka Jay Powell, went on 60 Minutes and he talked about pretty much what he thinks is going on. So Jerome Powell is chairman of the Federal Reserve, and long story short, you hear him saying stuff like, we're going to do everything that we can to help out the American people and the economy. And then you get the other side, which is Congress, who is constantly fighting over what the next stimulus package is. So I guess, Edin, what is their relation with each other for those of us that are probably hearing about who Jerome Powell is for the first time?
All right, first thing, stop. Make sure you're paying attention because this can get very interesting, also very boring. This is econ class. So that's actually what I majored in. So this is very near and dear to my heart. So Jerome Powell, JP, he is the chairman of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is responsible for all things money, essentially. There's different ones, regional offices, and they're responsible for economic research. They report on employment, on retail sales, how fast is the economy growing or not growing. So essentially it's a bunch of nerds. That's the summary of what they are and who they are. Jerome Powell and his power essentially gets to direct traffic at the Federal Reserve and what our country does in terms of monetary policy. So now monetary policy is ultimately how many dollars we're putting into circulation. And from a textbook perspective, they have a number of tools available to either try to speed up the economy or slow it down. And so now a quick history lesson on that. In the early 2000s, we had 9/11 happen. We had a slowdown in the economy. And then what we had happen is we had the Federal Reserve under Alan Greenspan start cutting interest rates as a method of stimulating the economy. Now, one of the biggest purchases any one of us makes in our lifetime is a house. And so when they decreased interest rates, it made houses more affordable. But they stimulated the economy, house prices went up, people were buying and selling houses left and right, and boom, we had 2008 happen. Let's ignore all the finer details. 2008, 2009 happens, economy crashes, Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, Big Ben comes out, March of 2009, says we're going to do everything in our power to support the economy. And I think it was March 9th, 2009, the stock market made a roaring comeback from that moment because of those words. And that's why this 60-minute interview is so important with JP, because he effectively said the same thing right now. He said what Ben said 11 years ago of we in our power in terms of monetary policy will do whatever we can, and I'll talk about it in a minute as to what they can do, what they can't do, and the effects. You brought up Congress. Congress manages fiscal policy. Fiscal means how much our government wants to spend and how much they want to collect vis-a-vis taxes. And so if you think about our friends in Congress, they're responsible for our budget. So income, expenses, what does the government have left over? The relationship between the two is, it hasn't always been like this, but ever since 2008, 2009, the Federal Reserve has essentially stepped in and financed fiscal policy. So traditionally, I see you kind of looking confused. Let me stop and let you ask questions.
So the money that the government has, doesn't that come from taxes?
Most of it comes from taxes, but we have been running what are called fiscal deficits for several decades now. Every now and then, I think under Obama we had a surplus, And then I think under Clinton, we had a surplus. I think you see the trend here. I'm apolitical. I don't care. Just how it kind of shakes out on paper. But yeah, tax revenue is supposed to be what we're spending. When we don't have enough tax revenue, what we have to do is the government issues bonds, so basically debt, and they say, let us borrow money from investors. It could be you and me. It could be our retirement accounts. It could be foreign investors, a number of different places. This is where the notion comes that China owns us because they've bought so much of our debt over the years that some people fear that China could just flood the markets by trying to sell it. We're going to ignore that completely, but that's where that notion comes from.
Okay, so right now, with that being said, the role, I guess, now is that, based on what I'm understanding, is that the Federal Reserve is trying to support the government by, I guess, issuing more bonds? Or buying more bonds?
Almost. You're 90% there. So what's happening is we have Congress authorizing stimulus, the first round of stimulus, $2.1 trillion. And the question is always, where does this come from? And what happens is Congress issues or approves the issuing of bonds. And so the government sells bonds out there. And given the fact that interest rates are so low, you have very little interest from traditional investors. And so who has to come in and buy them? That's where the Federal Reserve comes in. So Federal Reserve comes in, essentially prints money. They press a button now, add a couple of zeros to their bank account, and say, we're going to go and buy these bonds from Congress, and thereby we're going to support Congress, the stimulus packages, the fact that we're giving tax cuts to everybody. And that's the way we're going to support our government to stay open, is by us at the Federal Reserve being willing to buy them over here. They also
pretty much they're financing them. So they're supporting them by effectively saying, for this next, let's say the HEROES Act, which is $3 trillion. Hey, government, we know that you cannot afford all $3 trillion because you don't have all this in reserves. So the Federal Reserve is going to come in and say, you know what, we're just going to print $3 trillion, hand it to you, and you do with it what you want.
Correct. And if you've ever heard the term quantitative easing, this is exactly what it is. And the idea, the way they sell it to us is that, okay, instead of just printing money and it's not backed by anything, it is ultimately guaranteed by Congress in tax collections. So at some point, if Congress issued a 3-year bond, so that means that Congress promises the Federal Reserve that's going to pay it 1% a year for the next 3 years, including the principal amount. What essentially happens is this 3-year bond runs out. What we don't see is Congress never really pays this money over here, but the money comes out of circulation on paper. So the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, which measures assets, cash, and liabilities, what they owe. And of course, assets are also what they're owed by Congress. So that number is big. And that number essentially just ends up shrinking as these bonds just expire. They expire worthless. And for us, if we held those bonds and they expired worthless, we'd be out of money. The Federal Reserve doesn't end up being out of money because they sit there and they press buttons and make more money, delete money, and this is how it works. And ultimately, that's how they're supporting the economy, is by keeping interest rates super low. So one, the government can keep doing stimulus packages. 2, we as consumers can go out and finance houses cheap. We can finance cars cheap. Hopefully, it trickles down into student loan payments going down, into car payments going down. I already mentioned that one. Hopefully credit cards go down. So anything that we're financing, the idea is going to become cheaper and more affordable for us to do.
Now, in this interview on Sunday that happened, he also talked about how he doesn't think anything is like we're in trouble effectively until the end of 2021 when there is a vaccine that's out there that's being mass produced. So he's And he's come out and said, look, we are in this for the long run. We're nowhere near all of the tricks up our sleeve as far as in the ways that we can help. So it sounds like they've got a lot of other things that they can do on top of that. But then you have a senior White House advisor coming out on Monday saying, you know what? I think he's too down the road. I think he's looking at end of 2021. There's no way we're going to have a strong Q3, a strong Q4, and we're going to have a really strong 2021. So you got two sides of the spectrum. So I guess, Edin, you being the nerd that you are, which side of the aisle do you sit on?
I'm going to punch here and take the middle. So on one hand, what you have is our economy is 70% consumption, right? So supply demand, the way it's going to work out is right now everybody's in a holding pattern. Everybody's still afraid. How are we going to reopen? What are jobs going to look like 3 months from now? And until we have more clarity in that, we don't know what's going to happen. What we need to be mindful of is that end of 2021, when we have a vaccine, that's when we can return to full normal operations. Because I think until we really know that we are over the hump, we're not going to be able to reopen restaurants at full capacity. We're not going to be able to shove 200 people into a Best Buy or Walmart at a time. And until that happens, we're going to have a lot of structural issues in terms of now the retail stores and the restaurants, are they able to make full rent payments? So if they're not able to make full rent payments, the landlords get hurt. The landlords get hurt, lenders get hurt. So it kind of goes in full circle in terms of the second and third effects of us being at limited capacity. That's why you're hearing end of 2021 from one side. Flip it the other way, third and fourth quarter being super strong, that's coming on the hopes of we have more and more research of different vaccines. Somebody's going to come out within the next 3 to 4 months and say, we got it. And then it's a question of time lapse of how quickly can they produce it and how quickly can all of us get access to it. And that's why I said somewhere in the middle, because on the hope, we as humans are always acting ahead of time, right? So we're going to hear we have it. We don't know if we're going to get it next week or next month or 3 months from now, but we're going to act like everything's normal. We're going to go back to saying, okay, well, whatever. I'm going to go hang out with my friends. I'm going to go to the bar. I'm going to go to the store and not worry about it because they've got it figured out. And so that's the short end of the stick. And I think you're also seeing on consumption, a lot of stores are working really, really hard to shift their models to digital first, which again it's not the same. It's not what.
That's what JCPenney just came out and said. JCPenney just came out and said we're shutting down 30% of our stores, and it sounds like, I guess by going online that actually cuts into their margins. But it's better than going out of business.
Yeah, the margin story is super interesting because after 08, 09, everybody was talking about every retail store is going out of business across the board. Amazon's going to take over the world. The reason it didn't happen is because you had a couple other really smart companies figure out the supply chain. That's where the issue is in your supply chain, how can you make shipping affordable? A JCPenney of the world, who's already a discount retailer and who buys a lot of inventory, they're not created to be a drop ship company where you order and it comes straight out of the factory. They have a warehouse somewhere. That's where their margin compression is coming in, compared to a Walmart who's figured out the online game and figured out how to use third-party suppliers, where you're not really buying from Walmart, you're just using the Walmart platform to place an order, and it's coming from some other company. And that's the Amazon model that they've figured out how to replicate. And so everybody else is trying to figure that out to keep margins to stay alive.
So with companies shifting, I mean, like the whole, Jerome Powell really doesn't have anything to do with the stimulus packages and the voting. It's just straight up like he's there to finance it as best as he can, but it really is up to Congress, which we've talked about with this massive HEROES Act. The Republicans in the Senate are saying, look, we're not touching this thing until after Memorial Day. Well, the House has already passed it. Now, it barely passed it, but they passed it. Now, the Republicans are probably going to come in and say, you know what? You got $1 trillion going to local government. Do you need $1 trillion going to local government? Yes or no? So there's a lot of things that I'm going to venture to say they will come in. They will trim this $3 trillion thing way down. But you got your boy Jerome Powell over here that's ready to finance it. Hit that button, show that, that money fan, and print the money out there.
Yeah, I mean, from JP's perspective, it's easy because we have precedents for it. He has zero political risk. When Bernanke did it in 2009, there was a lot of fear. Bernanke took the Federal Reserve's balance sheet from, I think it was $600 billion, and he took it to $4 trillion. So that was a huge step up. And everybody was afraid of this thing called inflation. Is everything going to go sky high in terms of prices because they're printing this money? And that's where he came out and explained, well, we're just going to keep these bonds on our balance sheet. They're just going to run off in order for us to reduce our balance sheet and our exposure. And again, they can do that. Nobody else can. And that's what allowed it to work 11 years ago. And I think it's going to work again this go around. Now on the concept of inflation, nobody talks about how inflation is measured and what the negative effects of that are. And I don't know if you want to get into it here or if we're going to shelve that.
We'll do that in another video. Yeah, just to kind of wrap all this stuff up. We can talk about how all that works, because you would think on paper all this money going into it would cause massive inflation, but that's not happening at all.
At least not on paper.
At least not on paper. So, all right, there you guys have it. So that is your relationship and what's going on with the latest with, you got one side of the aisle, Jerome Powell saying, look, we're here to help you out. The other side seems to be arguing over what sort of money is going to be coming out and when. So just because you hear one saying we got you covered doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get all these new stimulus checks. So Jerome Powell went on 60 Minutes, said all this, but as you saw on Monday, if you saw it, stock market went up. So clearly whatever he said, they like. So as always, thank you guys very much. And do us a favor, if you like this video, make sure you stay up to date with everything. Hit the subscribe button and let us know that you want to keep coming back for more information, all things stimulus. Thank you very much.
See ya.